Let's get sweaty.
Hey guys, welcome to your Shenmue Dojo video. Today's video I'm looking at Shenmue 3 and the potential improvements that could be made in the game now we have ININ Games involved. Just to make a point, this is obviously a slightly delayed video. We've had the news a few months back with other things going on, like the 25th anniversary and other bits and pieces. I haven't got around to recording this. Just and also to note, this isn't going to be an exhaustive list. There's going to be some aspects of what I've picked up from the community, some personal ones, just as a sort of summary idea of the things they could look at doing. But I know there's a lot more out there that people would want doing. Obviously drop those in the comments below. I can certainly pick some of those up, and this is going to go outside of ports to things like Switch, Xbox and current generation consoles, because judging by the survey and what's out there, I suspect that's a given. So just a little bit of context as well for those of you who aren't aware, ININ Games have got a survey out at the moment which is asking for improvements around Shenmue 3 and what platform you want it on. I will drop the link in the description below, and then you can have a look at that and fill that survey in if you haven't done so already. There's no closing date on it, so just make sure you go and do that as soon as possible. So I'm going to divide the video up into some smaller changes, some larger changes, and a little bit of a thought around Shenmue 4 and ININ Games and how things might progress in 2025. Again, just completely hypothetical. So let's look at the smaller changes first. Now, most of these shouldn't have any massive impact on the game in terms of breaking anything that's currently there. But again, you have to sort of balance that out a little bit. By going too far, you will break the intrinsic systems within the game, and then you leave yourself a lot more work. But some of these are fairly, in my opinion, straightforward. I'm no developer, so someone may well tell me differently. So let's start off with translation issues. Now, this is a big issue. We know that the translation wasn't great in Shenmue 3. It seemed quite rushed. But there's one of these elements that's massively imperative to the story. So if you cast your minds back to the end of Shenmue 3, now spoiler alert if you haven't played this game already, they are on the boat leaving Niaowu, and they're talking to Shenhua's father about the scroll and what's been found on it. Now, Ryo states to Mr. Yuan that when talking about it, that's where we found the scroll. Now, that makes it seem like the Cliff Temple's where they found the scroll. Now, that isn't the case. We know that it was found in the Bell Tower. So that already has massive story implications, as it A, creates confusion, and B, it's just a complete mistranslation. So it needs to be saying something along the lines of, that was shown on the scroll we found in the Bell Tower at Bailu Village, or words to that effect. Like I say, it has massive story implications. On top of that, and there may be more of these as well through the game, if you look at the back of phone calls and the phone calls home in Shenmue 3, you give the code for Master Chen to speak to Guizhang, which is great. A nice little touch there to go back to the original game. But one of them says my friend, whereas it should be comrades. If you think you cast your mind back, that's Father Seven, Nine Dragons, Mother's Earth. Comrades in Shenmue 3, it's those first three, and then comrades. So again, a slight mistranslation, but also mess with the continuity a little bit as well. So if they can change those two things, that would go a long way just to resolving to what are quite small issues in terms of certainly the workload, but major issues in terms of the story implication, especially with the translation of that scroll. So that's one element. The next one, QTE timing. We all know in Shenmue 3 the QTEs are damned hard. That timing window is tough. Now, I know we've all got a little bit older, so our reaction times may have dropped off just a little bit, but they were really difficult. And on the nightmare setting, that window is nigh on impossible for some of those QTEs. When you think about certainly the chicken catching, for example, that is really tough. I've heard people break controllers over it. So they need to just widen those windows out a little bit to make those QTEs a little bit easier and reduce that level of frustration around it. It should be a very simple fix, but an extra half a second will just make all the difference in making sure those QTEs are easier to go through. There is a common theory out there that they were that hard because they wanted people to see some of the fail states. Some of those are quite funny, like Rhea getting smashed in the face with a fire extinguisher. But again, level it out with the frustration there around some of those things as well. Then I'm going to come on to the stamina system. Now, it's been widely panned, and I'm not a fan of it, if I'm being completely honest with you. It depletes pretty quickly, especially early on when you haven't got much health anyway. So the idea here is you either make it less intrusive or deplete at a much slower rate. Now, another issue with that as well is when you get to fights, you don't know when they're going to happen necessarily. So you could end up walking into a fight with 2 or 3 buttons of health. Now, that isn't going to help you with a lot of the fights in-game. So my idea here would be to have it refill for those fights, but then deplete back down for the open world exploration, regardless of what happens in that particular fight. So then if you do stumble across a fight, your health is up, you're okay, you can participate in that it's in a fair way as possible and reduce frustration that way. Just a little thing there, just to help maybe lessen the impact of that system within the game. I wouldn't take it out entirely, because I think then you're going to break some of the core mechanics, but if you reduce it and just make it less intrusive, I think then you're going to get some balance there between making sure the game and the core game systems are okay, but also reducing that player frustration. The next one, again, very, very small here, is a block on buying moves you already own from shops. Now, when you're trading in items through the pawn shops, or for the herb exchange, you will get a tick to say you own this move, so therefore you can't swap those herbs or whatever for it. Great, fantastic. But that needs implementing in the shops as well. So at the moment within Shenmue 3, you have a risk that you can buy the same move over and over and over again, and therefore waste your money. Now, earning money in the game isn't that difficult, but again, it's a source of frustration here. So when I was going for the Platinum Trophy on PlayStation 4, I had to sit there and write down the moves I owned and the moves that I needed left, and then cross-reference them with the shops. That took forever. Whereas if they had this system built in, it just wouldn't be a problem, and you could just sort of do that, and it will save you a shed load of time if you're going for the trophies there. Again, minor thing, but it's a quality of life thing as well. And the last thing I'm going to touch on here in terms of the smaller changes, and this has been talked about a lot, is the classic camera. Now, cast your mind back a few years. Team Walinshu released a mod which allowed for the classic camera, and I know some of the staff in the dojo also helped with some of that in terms of getting the right point of view around it and everything else as well. But the classic camera should have been an option in Shenmue 3 originally. I have no issue with the over-the-shoulder more modern camera, but why not have an option to have both? Now, the idea of having the modern one is you can just go away with that and do as you please. And the classic camera, in my opinion, gives you a bit more of a view of the whole world itself. Now, Shenmue 3 has beautiful environments, fantastic environments. Why not show those off? And why not also have that option for that classic camera? And you can see when you compare it to the original game actually just how close that mod gets it in terms of the classic camera to the originals, and actually what it does show off, I think it's a very good picture of the world around Rio, and I think just having that option in there would be a good way forward. Other things as well, you could have like a frame rate cap, for example, on base consoles, so the PlayStation 4, because again, there was so much stuttering around there. I think again, that will just make things a little bit smoother. But I'm going to park those smaller changes for a little bit, and I'm sure there's plenty of others that people want to talk about. As I say, drop them in the comments. Now, these are what I call larger scale changes. Now, these are ambitious. The issue with some of these is likely to be budget as well, because at the end of the day, you are going to need money to make these things happen. Now, some of these may cross into the territory of making Shenmue 4 just in terms of the pure cost implications here. So, starting off with the story content within Shenmue 3. Whether you like the game or not, the story content in the game was the weakest element of the game. I had a great time with the mini-games. I thought the fighting engine was okay, needed a bit of polish, but I'll come on to that in a minute. And I got lost in the world and enjoyed the world. But the storytelling and the story content in 3 is lacking. We all know that. So, for example, you could have more content with Grandmaster Feng in Bailu Village. He trained a WoW. So why not have more of that training arc around what happened in Bailu Village with a WoW? The training there that he conducted with a WoW as well. And just have a little bit more there, just to add to the lore a little bit. Likewise, in Niao, some more content to Niao and her relationship with Mr. G. All those things would just help the game and the story know, and just give that padding in the story that it needs to give people's motivations to what's going on, how things have happened, and why you're getting to the point you are. And again, to add to that, again, if you want to understand motivations, talk about the end of the game where Shilling, Grandmaster Bay, and Mr. Su help Rio storm the castle. Great cutscene, but there's no context behind it. Why do they want to help Rio? Now, Grandmaster Bay obviously trained Rio a little bit, so you can get some idea of what's going on. But the other two, there's no real sort of relationship established there, and no sort of intricate detail around that as to why they might want to help Rio. So if you had that in there, that would just give a bit more story context. And likewise with Baisha. Now, Baisha would be great, but you've then got to construct a whole new area. You've got to make the story for that. Does the budget allow for something like this? You are then crossing into territory, if you're creating new content for Shenmue 3, of going, do you know what? Listening to the improvements or whatever the community are asking for, is it then better to go, look, let's just essentially park Shenmue 3, release some cross-platforms, tidy up some small things as suggested, but then going into the bigger territory with Shenmue 4 and making those improvements there? Because at the end of the day, you need a return on investment. Now, are you going to get a return on investment through Shenmue 3 and essentially a definitive edition or not? I don't know. That's the hard question there. And within that as well, I've mentioned the fighting system. Now, the fighting system, once you get into it, I think isn't a bad system. But it lacks polish, it lacks hit detection, and it needs a tutorial. The tutorial in the game is just hit buttons. Now that really, for me, doesn't explain anything. Doesn't explain the dodge mechanic and how actually if you've got low health, if you dodge, you get a slow-mo in there, which is fantastic. It doesn't mention any of that. You need a proper tutorial in there. But again, some of these larger things, and I've only listed 2 or 3 here, they then could go into a wider budget conversation, and is it worth it? That's the question I think needs asking there. And then my final thought, I guess, is coming on to Shenmue 4 and whether ININ themselves can do it. Now, as a company, ININ have been fantastic. They've been engaging with the community, and they look to have the Shenmue series best interests at heart. But in terms of their capital, can they do a Shenmue 4 on their own? Do they need to seek additional partners? Now, they have the structures in place. They're obviously a publisher. They have their own physical producing company in terms of Strictly Limited. So they have those arms already, which may allow somebody to come in and maybe invest in something because those structures are in place already. So that person coming in is not going to have to worry about those things. But Shenmue 4 is going to need a fairly substantial budget. Even if you go linear, it's going to need a fairly substantial budget to get this thing made. Now, ININ doing it on their own would be fantastic. I think that would be the best case scenario, potentially, if they can secure within their realms of funding the budget they think could do it. But obviously, if they can't, you're going to need to then seek out further partners, potentially. So again, I'm not sure how this is going to play out, but as we come into 2025, I can safely say that I'm reassured that A, ININ are going to do the best they can by the series, and B, I think we've got exciting times ahead for the series, whatever comes of Shenmue 3, Shenmue 4. I think we're in a good place. So we are going to be starting the year, I think, from a position of strength. And that's obviously with the tweetathons, that's with everything else the community is doing as well. I think we're in a really good position, guys. But anyway, like I said, this list isn't exhaustive. It's a very, very short list of things that just sort of popped out from things I've seen in the community and some own personal changes or recommendations, I guess, that I would want if I was asked. What do you guys think? Have I missed anything there? What would you like in terms of Shenmue 3 in terms of the bigger changes or the smaller changes? And do you think it's worth the hassle, or should that focus then be on making some smaller changes, cross-platform, and then move us on to Shenmue 4? And how would you budget that, sort of balance that budget, I guess, around what the limits are in terms of the changes to a Shenmue 3 if we got there? As I always say at the end of these videos, guys, £2 a month, you can be a member, get all content ahead of time, nothing's locked behind a paywall, it goes to the scheduling system, and all money goes to running the website that James and the costs that James and I will incur on that. Likewise, thank you for dropping in on all the content the dojo is putting out, and I will be back with a video in the not too distant future. But for now, guys, take care, have a good one.